Okay, good evening, everyone. In the interest of time, we are going to get things started. On behalf of the Board of Education and the entire district here in Rush-Henrietta, I want to welcome everyone to this year's Community Budget Forum. This has been an incredibly unique school year, and I want to start by thanking our Board of Education for their vision, their leadership and fortitude during a year that has been unlike any other. So I want to recognize them, Board Member Jennifer Laird, our Board President Diane McBride, Board Member May Abdullah, and Board Member Nicole LaPlaca. Thank you for all that you've been doing and all that you continue to do in support of our community and our kids. I also want to thank our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, Andy Whitmore, for his leadership, not only in delivering what I consider to be a really good budget, which is going to allow us to continue to support our kids in the way that they need to be supported, but also for all that he's done this year in support of all the operational pieces, which became really, really complicated. Things around busing and feeding our students through food service and maintaining our buildings and grounds. Thank you so much. And we also have Marianne Exler here, who does so much of the detail work related to the budget. So thank you. And to our community members that are here and watching at home, thank you so much for all your support, because it's made all the difference during this unprecedented year. So I want to start by saying that the budget development process was very similar to many other aspects of school planning this year, in that it was very uncertain for most of the process. We knew that the pandemic would have some sort of an effect on school funding because of the state of where the economy was here within New York State. And we just were very uncertain about what it was all going to mean for us. So we knew that it would be uncertain, but we also were very optimistic coming into this year, because we were looking at the numbers and recognizing that we were in really good shape. And we were in really good shape because we had a lot of growth that impacted our budget. We had the highest growth factor in Monroe County, and that's attributed to the RG&E substation coming online. So we knew that that was going to benefit us and put us in a position of strength this budget season. But we were anticipating a reduction in state aid all along. And so we were trying to anticipate what that was going to look like. Our state aid runs came in about probably 22 or 23 hours ago, and that was really favorable news for us. So, you know, we knew that this would be, in a typical year, a very good budget. It was looking promising even in a year of uncertainty, but now looking at the state aid runs, we're in an even better position, because we are receiving federal stimulus money. And again, we weren't certain about how that was going to come in what amount, and if it was going to be a scenario where we were going to receive federal stimulus money, but we were going to lose state aid. And that wasn't the case. We didn't lose state aid, and we received federal stimulus money, which is going to help us absorb a lot of those reopening costs, which will center around supporting our students as they return to school. So I give you that context because I want you to know that we are in a really good position despite all of these unusual circumstances that we've been dealing with all year. So this budget is going to allow us to support our budget goals, which have remained consistent, at least during my time here. We focus on 3 areas, one being that our budget is educationally sound, meaning that we're able to not only maintain the scope of our educational programs, but build upon them. We want to make sure that our budget supports equity within our district. And when we talk about equity, we mean a couple of different things. One, you know, from a state perspective, the way that they hold school districts accountable is through transparency reporting. So every year, Andy and his team are required to submit a transparency report which looks at how we're funding our schools based on enrollment, based on demographics, and looks at, are we funding our schools equitably? But here in Rush-Henrietta, from our standpoint, what we're ultimately trying to do is, one, to make sure that we budget conservatively enough where we can respond to the needs of each individual school, because their needs are oftentimes uniquely different. And we want to be in a position where, whether it's a need that's based on enrollment, or a need that's based on sometimes the physical environment, or in other cases it may be a need that's centered around programming, we want to make sure that our budget gives us the flexibility to respond to those needs throughout the course of the year. We also want to be in a position where we can support equitable outcomes throughout the course of the year. Okay, based on what we're seeing as far as our interim assessment data, when we're looking at, in some cases, behavioral data, and also when we're looking at state data such as New York State testing in grades 3 through 8, Regents exam data, and graduation rates. And then lastly, we want to make sure that our budget is fiscally responsible. And essentially what that means is, as we've been talking about, budgeting conservatively, making sure that budget to budget increases remain reasonable, that we're not burdening our taxpayers, and that ultimately we stay below the tax levy cap. So here are some of the highlights I mentioned before. When we talk about making sure that our budget is educationally sound, we want to make sure that we're able to maintain the scope and quality of our programs and our services, and we want to make sure that we're in a position to continue to build on programs and the opportunities that we offer to our kids as needed. We want to make sure that we're able to support identified school improvement priorities. So this year our priorities are centered around equity and inclusion, mental wellness, special education, and instructional program. So if we're going to identify something as a district priority, we need to make sure that we put resources behind it. And an example of that would be what we do to support equity and inclusion. In this year's budget, we have about $135,000 that we've earmarked in support of that initiative alone. So things like workforce diversity, professional development are centered around culturally relevant curriculum or restorative practices. We have that in the budget so that we can support that particular initiative, and every other initiative has a budget line in support of it as well. We want to make sure that we're tax cap compliant, and that essentially means that we stay below the tax levy cap, which this budget does. This budget reflects a pilot reduction for Marketplace Mall, and this may seem odd and out of place that we're mentioning this as a budget highlight, but it's something that we have to continue to keep our eye on, and we have to keep our eye on it because it's a major driver within our budget. To put it in context, we have lost about $1 million over the course of the last 4 years, and that's significant when you're looking at the size of our district and the size of our budget. So that's why it's in there as a highlight. This budget needs to be able to provide flexibility for pandemic costs and return to school. So some of these costs we can anticipate, and some of these costs We will probably find out more specifics this spring and this summer as time goes on. We, for example, are anticipating that we're going to have to offer some sort of a remote option next year, and that comes at a cost. So in terms of what we built into the budget, we've built in additional resources for administrative oversight, for technology and infrastructure costs associated with some sort of a remote learning option for students. We know that, we're going to have to continue to spend more money on PPE and disinfectant and things of that nature, additional cleaning costs, that will continue going into September. So we've budgeted for that. And as I mentioned before, we received federal stimulus dollars that we're going to be able to use to help us with reopening costs. For example, we already know that a certain percentage of federal stimulus dollars is going to be earmarked for supporting students with learning loss and intervention. So that will help us significantly to open up the school year, because, as I said before, we knew that we would be getting federal stimulus dollars, but the question as we were planning was, are they going to give the money with one hand and then take with the other in state aid? And they didn't do that. So that's very, very good news for school districts across New York State, and we're included in that. And the last highlight that I want to make note of centers around the continued development of reserves, including capital reserves, which we use to enhance our learning spaces and support our buildings. You have to think of it like a home, where you constantly have to put work and effort and resources into maintaining the space, and our schools are very similar to that. They require constant upkeep, and so that's how we utilize our capital reserves. But outside of our capital reserves, I've talked about, whether it be at budget advisory or when we're out talking with administrators or people in the community, the importance of continued reserve development, because that's what saves our bacon in years where the budget situation isn't favorable like it is this year. It puts us in a situation where we can utilize those reserves and not have to make draconian cuts. So the recommended budget is as follows. Total expenditures are just a shade under $140 million. The budget-to-budget increase is 3.2%. As I mentioned before, we will be under the tax cap. The tax cap might look a little higher than usual, and again, that is because of the growth that we experienced here in Henrietta with the RG&E substation coming online. But having said that, when we look at the actual impact to the tax rate, it will be 1.7% or less. And what I'm going to say tonight is that we will be recommending a significantly lower tax rate given the situation that we now find ourselves in after the state aid runs are out. But I do want to make note of the fact that even at 1.7, this tax rate is the lowest in Monroe County. So that's good news for taxpayers and community members. So I'm going to turn things over to Andy. He's going to talk specifically about some of the factors driving the budget. And I should have said it in the beginning, this is more of a housekeeping item. We're going to ask that you hold your questions and your comments till the end of the presentation. We've built in time so that we can have that Q&A and that give and take, but we're going to ask that you hold questions and comments until the very end once we get through the presentation, and then we'll make time for that. So I'm going to disinfect the remote and the microphone. And hand it off to Andy to talk us through some of the detail.
All right. Thank you, Bo. I'll get into some of the detail here. It's not quite as exciting, but it helps explain what drives the nuts and bolts behind our budget. For our increase this year, as you can imagine, employee benefits are our single biggest increase. For most employers, salaries and wages and benefits are their biggest cost driver, and we're certainly no exception. We are a people business, so you'll see later, salaries and wages are our biggest cost driver, and benefits are second. And this year, they are our biggest increase. So you'll see $1.8 million of increase. It's a 5.4% year-over-year increase. The bulk of that is driven by health insurance. We're not immune, just like every employer. Health insurance continues to be a significant cost driver. The other big thing in it this year, as a New York State entity, we're required to pay into the New York State pension systems. And there's two different pension systems. One is called the Teacher's Retirement System. So any certified teacher belongs to that. And the other is called the New York State Employee Retirement System, and that's for our support staff, our non-certificated employees. And that is the one this year that is driving a big increase. The rate we pay in went from 14.6% of every dollar of salary to 16.2%. So those were the two big drivers in our employee benefits. So health insurance is a contractual item, it is typically our biggest cost driver. You'll see our wage and salary obligation. Wages are our single biggest spending item in our budget, but the increase is lower, $600,000, about 1%. And our contractual obligations are actually higher than that, but you'll see later how we got down to a 1% increase. Interfund transfers, when we present the spending budget to you, it's for what the state calls the general fund. There are separate funds. One of those is called capital fund, where money that's designated for maintaining and improving our buildings is kept. We do transfer to that, and that's our big increase. Our Board of Education for many years has been very fiscally conservative and taken the building aid that we receive from past projects and reinvesting that in the future projects. And this year, our secure vestibule projects came online, so we're getting a building aid increase, so that went up. And we're taking that increase and transferring to capital projects to help fund future projects, which enables Rush-Henrietta to have one of the lowest debt rates in the state of school districts. We tend to pay cash and avoid borrowing costs very often. The other transfer we have, it's called ESY. It stands for Extended School Year, and those are for our special education students who need continued support year-round, so over the summer. So we're increasing our funding for that this year. As you can imagine, the shutdown has affected our special needs students pretty severely, so we're expecting more supports to be needed this summer, so we're increasing the transfer for that as well. And that is funded through, a lot of that extended school year program is funded by the state. They pick up probably about 2/3 of the cost, and so it goes into a separate fund called Special Aid Fund, and the district share is what we transfer over. So the increase for the district is only about 1/3 of the total increase cost. The rest will be funded by the state. And then BOCES, our BOCES costs are up about $574,000. And there again, BOCES take some of our neediest special ed students, so that's a big cost driver there. We have two types of costs with BOCES. One is what we call shared services, where they support a lot of our computer infrastructure or our technology purchases. That piece of our budget is pretty flat. The other thing is the special ed support that we send some of our neediest kids to BOCES because they have the specialists to be able to address those needs. And those costs are going up. So that drives the $574,000 increase. And then the last thing is pandemic cost. So we know there will be ongoing effects from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we've budgeted $426,000 incremental new money in the budget for next year. And that's for a combination of people and supplies. That's where we buy our personal protective equipment, our disinfecting materials and supplies, as well as some of our support staff to help address the learning needs. The budget cuts. These are the cuts that, the reason the wages only went up 1%, we continually try to address costs every year throughout the district because the reality is our structural cost increase, contractual and benefits, tend to be higher than our tax cap allows us. So we're always looking for reductions that we can make. This year we had 3 significant reductions. We eliminated 2 administrative positions, and that was done at the end of last year, so those have already happened. They happened through attrition. As people left the district, we took existing administrators and moved them into new positions and reduced 2 of our administrative positions. That saved $250,000. Every year, we get what we call turnover savings, which is simply retirement. When our longer tenured employees retire, they tend to be at the top of the pay scale. We hire new teachers in who are at the low end of the pay scale. And so the salary differential is called turnover savings. So we booked about $300,000 for that this year. And those were announced retirements. We know these people will definitely be retiring. Then the last one is we eliminated 2 TOSA positions. These are teachers on special assignments who were doing special projects in the instructional area. We eliminated those positions this year. Rather than backfill some teacher openings, we eliminated the special positions and moved these people back to the classroom. So that saved about $150,000. So in total, we had about $700,000 in budget reductions, all coming out of the salary line. How do we fund all of our expenses? The superintendent mentioned our budget is just under $140 million. So where does the money come from? The bulk of it comes from our local taxpayers. Our property tax levy is $86 million, so that 62% of the money we fund comes from property taxes. State aid is the second biggest chunk, $39.2 million, about 28% of our budget. And this is the one where the superintendent mentioned, we just got, the state just finalized their budgets, we got updated numbers, so we'll be making some recommendations to the board next week about how should that money be allocated. It's going to be a little bit higher than what we have budgeted here, so the question is, what do we do with it? Sales tax, the county shares sales tax with the school district, so we get about $4.8 million from that. Pilot agreements, the superintendent mentioned the marketplace pilot agreement. A pilot is a payment in lieu of taxes, and that's where the local industrial development agency, in order to attract businesses here, is able to grant tax exemptions to businesses or other developments. So they don't pay the normal property tax that other taxpayers do, and typically they pay a percent of what the normal taxes would be. So these are in lieu of property taxes. We get about $4 million from that, which is down $400,000 this year, and that's because of the ongoing reductions at the Marketplace Mall site. Fund balance and reserves. We're fund about $3.2 million this year, or next year, and that's down from this year. This is the other thing. Our Board of Education has always been very strategic about funding various reserves, whether it's capital reserves to keep up our properties, or some of our other reserves to fund various costs. The biggest one is for pension system increases, because they tend to bounce around depending how the stock market does. And so when the state announced at the beginning of this year's budget year they could potentially cut our aid by 20%, we had budgeted, we made some cuts, well, the board made some cuts, as well as increase the use of reserves so the programs for our students weren't hit significantly. So we're reducing the amount of reserve usage in next year's budget, but we're still using about $3.2 million. And then we get some other small fees and rentals, $1.7 million. That's about 1% of our budget. So probably the biggest single item in there is our BOCES rent. BOCES rents out half of this building from us, so that's over $500,000 a year. And there's a bunch of smaller things. So that's how we fund our spending budget. So this is the revenue side. So what does it mean to our homeowners, our residents in this district? The tax levy cap, most of you have heard of the 2% tax cap. The 2% really is variable. It's the lower of inflation or 2%. So if inflation is lower, and you'll see here, the first item, the inflation factor was 1.23%. So that's the inflation factor we're allowed to use. But one of the other adjustments we're allowed to use is for real growth. If there's new housing development that brings in new tax dollars, we can also increase our levy for that. Or as the superintendent mentioned this year, we had a huge RG&E project built off East River Road. That alone is driving over $2 million in new taxes. So without affecting any of the other homeowners, that project drives over $2 million in new taxes, and the state does allow us to add that to our levy. If our pilots increase, we reduce our levy by that much, but in times when our pilots decrease, we're allowed to increase our levy to offset it. So our pilots reduced $400,000, so we are allowed to build that into our levy to offset the loss of that cost. And there's 3 other exemptions that are allowed in the tax cap. None of them affected us this year. It says pension costs over 2%. So I had mentioned earlier that our ERS pension cost, the rate went from 14.6% to 16.2%. Because the rate increase is under 2%, we don't get to adjust our levy, but our real costs grew 11%. So 16.2 versus 14.6% is an 11% cost increase, but we get no relief under the tax cap until the rate gets up over 2%. If we had a significant tort action, a liability judgment against us, we could put that in the tax cap. Unfortunately, we haven't had that. And taxes for capital projects. So most districts, when they do significant capital projects, they borrow money and they're allowed to levy taxes to pay that money back. Our Board of Education for many years has taken the building aid we receive and put that money back into capital funds, so we tend to pay cash, so we don't get any exclusion for that because we're not adding taxes to our taxpayers. So our adjusted tax levy cap is 4.48%, which is more than 2%, but it's still under the tax cap. And the biggest reason are the second and third lines, the real growth we can add to it, and then loss in pilots we can offset in our levy. So what does that do for our tax rate? Even though the tax levy, the total taxes collected, is up 4.5%, our tax rate is only up no more than 1.7% because that new RG&E project is new money, so that part of the levy will not increase the homeowner's tax rate. So the homeowner will see no more than 1.7%, and when we get the final tax rolls, often it comes in lower than that. So the tax levy increased $3.7 million, 2.2 of that alone is from RG&E. The inflation factor we used was 1.23. We do like to measure the tax rate because it affects our homeowners against the Social Security COLA. Social Security this year is only 1.3%, so our tax rate is higher than our Social Security COLA. But over the last 10 years, our tax rate tends to be much lower than the average Social Security COLA. And as the superintendent mentioned, with the new state aid information we received, we're hoping to reduce that 1.7% so we can get that lower. Our state aid comes in a bunch of different formats. The biggest chunk is called foundation aid, and these numbers were built upon the governor's budget. That's the only information we had up until late last night. So $20.8 million of foundation aid we get, and the governor proposed to hold it flat year over year, and that's unrestricted money. There's no restrictions on how we use that. All these other aids that we see are what they call reimbursement aids. So if we spend $1 this year, the state will reimburse us a % of that next year. So for example, high excess cost aid, which is up 16%, $2.1 million, that's for our high need special education students. So the district is responsible for paying up to the first 4 times the cost to educate a special ed kid. So for example, if it costs $10,000 to educate a general ed student, to the extent a special ed student costs over $40,000, we'll get some aid on that excess of $40,000, and we only get a % of that excess. But that drives $2 million. Special education costs are our second highest budget item. It is a significant expense for our needy kids, but we do get some help from it. And then private excess costs is the same thing. Some of our special ed kids are have such high needs, whether it's very medically fragile or some other high need, we have to send them to a private school. We also get a piece of that reimbursed to us through private excess cost aid. Our BOCES cost, our shared services on BOCES, in order to incent school districts to combine forces through a BOCES, the state gives us what they call shared service BOCES aid. So we're looking at $3.2 million of BOCES aid, and probably the biggest single item there is our technology purchases. We purchase most of our technology through BOCES, and that helps drive lower cost as well as we get the state aid. Transportation aid, $6 million. The state does give us help support our transportation costs because we have to follow the state mandates for transporting students. Building aid, there's where we do get some money back for our construction projects, probably around 60 cents on the dollar, and that's called building aid, and that's the money the board typically then redirects for future projects. And then instructional aids is state aid. It's a per student allocation for textbooks or hardware or software. So that gets us our total state aid, $39.2 million. Foundation aid, a number of years ago, the state was involved in a lawsuit because they were underfunding, education. So they came up with what they call a foundation aid formula. Every year, we've been paid less than what that formula entails. And you can see next year, we're down about $11 million from the formula. The good news is the state in the latest budget has decided to start address that. So we are going to receive some incremental aid this year that was not proposed by the governor. So that $11 million will go down a couple $1 million. So to summarize, our recommended budget, $139.6 million. It's a $4.3 million increase. Our tax rate increase, less than 1.7%. We're hopefully even lower than that. Our tax levy increase is under the tax cap at the 4.5%. How does that compare to prior years, budget to budget? 3.2% for next year. Last year was 2.5%. 2 years ago it was 4%, and then 2 years before that it was 4%. Those were years we had a number of high-need special ed students move into the district, which drove those cost increase. Tax rate, how does this compare to prior years? We're proposing no more than 1.7. The actual we won't know until we get the final tax rolls at the end of May. But last year we proposed 1.98 as no more than. The actual was a decrease of 3.7%. So most of you will probably, if you live in the town of Henrietta, you know there was a reassessment, so the increased value. The district does not benefit if there's a reassessment and your tax assessment goes up. It causes the tax rate to go down. So the district gets the amount of levy that we're allowed under the tax cap. So if the market value of homes goes up, the tax rate goes down, and that happened in this year's tax rate. So you can see every year we tend to be under what we commit to. So for planning purposes, a homeowner knows it'll be no more than 1.7, but we're hoping it'll be a lot lower than that. What does that mean to our homeowners? If you have a $150,000 house, it's about $48 per year more for you in taxes. $200,000 house is $64, and a $250,000 house is about $81. In prior years, a lot of that was offset by the tax rebate. So you might remember that you would get a check in the mail from the state for a rebate. The governor has canceled that program for this year, so there is no more tax rebate. How do we stand up to our peers around the county? This year, we are the lowest tax rate in the county, $19.09 per $1,000. So as you can see, the highest tax rate is $28.20. So we're about a third under that, and we're about 20% lower than the average tax rate. So we hope to remain the lowest next year as well. When you go in the vote, you'll see a couple of budget propositions. The first one is just authorization. The voters need to approve school district budgets, so it's authorization to expend $139.5 million. And the second one is for bus purchases. Every year, the district refreshes a portion of its fleet. We've been at $2.4 million the last few years. And what that entails, this year we're proposing buying 10 of the large buses that you see. We are converting to propane. Propane is much cleaner, a lot less maintenance for our mechanics because it's a cleaner fuel. We're about 2/3 of our way through our conversion to propane buses. So a few years ago, Senator Gallivan gave us a grant so we could have our own propane tank. So that's what we use. Our buses now fuel on site, and we continue the conversion. We'll also purchase 6 mid-size buses. The smaller buses, they tend to be for our special ed or our high-need students, and then 1 minivan. So $2.4 million. So those are the 2 propositions that the voters will see when they vote on our budget. And our vote will be Tuesday, May 18th. We are moving the location this year to enable social distancing. It'll be at the high school gym. So it's on the west side of the school. If you go to the rear of the parking lot, there's a separate gym entrance and a lot more space there so we can socially distance people. And also just a reminder for folks, in a couple of weeks, April 22nd, in the same location, we'll have the Meet the Candidates Night. So for our board members who are running for the board this year, you'll be able to meet them. So that concludes the budget. I'll turn it back over to the superintendent for questions.
Okay, so we're going to open it up for questions and comments. We're going to ask that if you have questions and comments that you come up and utilize the microphone on the stand on this side of the gymnasium.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. I'm here tonight as a concerned parent of 3 children in the RLA, and I'm here as a candidate for the Board of Education who is also concerned about the community as a whole. My name is Rachel Sherman, and I thank you for the opportunity to comment publicly on the budget that the superintendent is proposing. The budget does not include a single extra dollar, not one, on new strategies to address learning loss caused by the pandemic. I was happy to hear Mr. Wright in your opening remarks acknowledging the receipt of federal money earmarked for learning loss. But to be clear, the program and services budget that was reviewed by the Budget Advisory Council, you made clear was a rollover budget with no new programs or services, no new teachers, no new social workers, no new paraprofessionals, etc. And we know that the pandemic has tremendously impacted our students academically. I've heard our teachers, our paraprofessionals, our principals say as much, and I can see it in my own 3 children. But to add some research to this anecdotal information, I submit McKinsey & Company's Public and Social Sector Group study in December, which included data of actual learning loss seen to that point, as well as estimated data on the level of expected learning loss for different groups of students at the end of this school year. Their predictions are startling. On average, students could lose 5 to 9 months by the end of June 2021, and students of color could be 6 to 12 months behind, compared with 4 to 8 months for white students. Rock the Future, a not-for-profit collaboration that focuses on the academic achievement of Rochester students, estimates losses in reading equivalent to 2 to 7 months of missed school and losses in math of 4 to 22 months. I'll be the first to admit I am not an education expert at all. I'm a parent and I'm a lawyer by trade, so I do not have the expertise to tell you what you should be doing to address this for Rush-Henrietta students. But I do know that you need to start to consider evidence-based strategies with all relevant stakeholders, including our educators in the classroom, and start publicly discussing what's on the table that might work for our district. Some of the recently passed federal dollars from the American Recovery Act coming to the district are earmarked for evidence-based interventions to address the effects of unfinished instruction and the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on underserved students. Many of the strategies that are referenced in the articles I've read, and I'll leave with you, Mr. Wright, capture my interest, like 1, targeted intensive tutoring in groups of 1 or 2 students for 50 minutes a day. 2, acceleration academies comprised of week-long summer instruction with 25 hours of targeted teaching in small groups of 8 to 12 students. 3, after-school programs where well-trained educators deliver aligned and high-quality curricula to students in small groups for about an hour, supplementing the high-quality instruction that happens during the regular school day. 4, supporting the development of caring relationships between educators and students so that students feel like they belong and better engage with the extended learning opportunities. And last, tracking and reporting on student growth, sharing this information with students and their families along the way. Finally, some school districts have already developed extended learning plans to identify impacted students, needs, resources and budget, partnerships, and alignment with other school initiatives. Notably, Ohio has required their public schools to develop and report on their plans by April 1st. I've included one such plan from a suburb of Cleveland as an example of what might be included in the RH plan. Obviously, this is not just an issue for the kids who are already behind academically before the pandemic. This affects students at every level, including those who've been denied the opportunity to take advanced classes or access prerequisite classes that would have allowed them to pursue more rigorous curriculum tracks throughout their junior and high school years. So, Mr. Wright, it's not too late to work on an extended learning plan so that we can use the summer and the next school year effectively to help our students make up ground, build confidence, access advanced opportunities, and be highly successful in their future academic careers. My comments today are limited to this important substantive issue of pandemic learning loss, But I also have serious concerns about the budget development process, which is not an open or effective way in obtaining stakeholder input. I'll be bringing those concerns to the Board of Education next week. All the sources I've referenced tonight, I'll leave in a packet for you, and anyone listening who would like the packet of information can email me, racheljsherman@gmail.com, and I'll send the documents electronically. Thank you for your attention.
So I'm going to respond to a few things in your summary. One is, I'm very appreciative to all those people who gave of their time and their thinking throughout the budget advisory process. I feel that that's a very open, very transparent process, and all of the information, all of it, that we discuss as a team behind closed doors is presented out in the open. It's presented to the Board of Education, and it's presented and discussed at the Budget Advisory Committee meetings. And anyone is able to take part in that process as a Budget Advisory Committee member. So that's the first thing I would say. I also, again, want to thank our current Board of Education members for their leadership and their stewardship throughout this process, because they've pushed us to be thoughtful about what next year is going to look like, recognizing the uncertainty that exists as we look ahead in the weeks and months ahead of us, but also as we're looking to next fall. And those are the questions that they've been asking us throughout. What does this look like for students and for families when we return? And how are we going to support students? I've said all along, as far as our reopening planning goes, we are positioned as good as any district in the state to reopen and to support children. I was not going to propose adding additional resources without knowing what we were going to be able to fund and having a definitive set of numbers as far as what our budget looked like. However, as I said from the outset, we budget in a way that's conservative so that we can always respond to the needs of our buildings, to the needs of our teachers and administrators, and to the needs of our students. However, we are in a very fortunate position seeing our state aid runs where we are going to be able to offer extended programming for students in different levels of support as far as intervention goes, which will allow us to address student learning loss for those children who may need it because of the difference in the learning models that they've endured this year during the pandemic. But we budget in such a way where I've been confident every year that I've been here, regardless of the circumstances, that we can meet the needs of kids. Like I said, we're in a fortuitous position because of the additional stimulus money that we're going to receive in support of our schools. So as far as being able to reopen and accept our kids back and being confident that we can support them in the ways that we need to, I'm very confident that we can do that. And as far as knowing exactly what those needs are, the reality is that we're not going to know those needs until they come back and they're in our classrooms and we can see how they interact with each other, where we can see, through certain assessments, whether you're talking, from a quantitative perspective or a qualitative perspective, we can gather that data and that information and look and see what's going to be needed. And I think that positions us in a good place this summer to make those adjustments and be ready in September. As far as summer planning goes and supporting kids, we've already had some conversations about what we're going to do additionally to support special needs students additionally, and to also support programming for English language learners. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Andy, or if I covered it.
No, that's very good. And just a reminder, a few years ago, the Board of Education invested in a director.
I didn't disinfect.
That's okay. I'm vaccinated. A few years ago, the Board of Education invested in a director of wellness and equity, and that office has been all year working hard to plan on how we can support our kids, not only this year, but as they return full-time next year.
Yeah, that's an important point. Because as I said before, even in a typical school year, when we identify district priorities, those that are centered around equity or those that are centered around mental wellness, there always is a budget line which provides resources in support of those priorities. So you have a follow-up?
So thank you, for your response. So you just said that we're in a position to be able to offer extended programming for students.
Yes.
Is that in this budget?
It will be, because we're going to receive federal stimulus money that is going to be earmarked for that. It will more than likely be a requirement.
So there will be a budget amendment process that will add in that money with the hiring or the additional support for an extended program.
So here's what you don't want to commit to with that type of funding. Recognizing that this is a unique set of circumstances, we've been given this money in support of reopening our schools and continuity of operations and services for one-time expenditures. What you don't want to do in this scenario is to build in things that are going to be reoccurring costs, like, say, additional teaching positions. If we had a need to do that based on enrollment, and we were looking at this as a long-term investment, a reoccurring expense, then we wouldn't use that federal stimulus money.
Sure, but God willing, this is a one-time pandemic.
What's
with God willing, it's a one-time pandemic. So the ideas of extended summer, intensive programs, tutoring,
Yep.
I would hope that would be something that would be for some concentrated period of time to help kids with the 4 to 8 months, the 9 to 22 months of learning loss. So, it may be that you find through extended day programs that you're really excited about the ways, especially our most underserved students, potentially can catch up. Potentially, you close learning gaps. Potentially, you decide that these are things we want to build into the longer term program and services of the Rush-Henrietta district, potentially. So you will learn some things. But as far as waiting for students to come back in the fall to assess them, respectfully, I disagree.
That isn't what I said, not to interrupt you, but that isn't what I said. I said that our plan is to try and bring students back this spring so that we would be in a position where we would be able to see in real time what they would need and be able to use summer as an opportunity to hit the ground running.
And offer programs to students in the summer?
Yeah, I talked about some of the programs that we're already offering. I'm not in a position to sit here tonight and say, here's exactly what we're going to be offering in the summertime, and here's exactly what we're going to be offering in the fall. What I'm telling you is that we've been given money, which we found out about 22 hours ago, in support of addressing learning loss as at least a one-time endeavor. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. Potentially is a word that you use, so I'll use it as well. Potentially, if some of these programs, if the Board of Education collectively decided that they wanted to continue some of these programs, then we would have to look at the overall cost, and we would have to measure that against what we had available in the budget. But what I'm saying to you is, I am not recommending to you or anyone else in the room that we utilize this stimulus money, which will go away, to fund reoccurring expenses that exist within our budget year to year.
Sure. And certainly I hope you didn't take my comments as suggestive of that, as I was not suggesting that.
Okay.
But you do have the MAPS assessments, and you do have teacher observations. I think there's a lot of data you have now, whether students come back in the spring or not. to make plans now. So my preference would be that you budget for those opportunities now and aren't in a position. Oh, I'm sorry. Why don't you take the mic, please?
Sure. As a teacher, data now, especially those that we get from remote academies or from remote learning, is not really authentic data. So I think it's kind of hard and it's kind of not in our best interest to take a look at data that we get from, let's say, the MAPS test, because it's given, especially, I know I've given it as a teacher, to students who were distracted at home, had other things going, had to watch a sibling. I think that, at least from my perspective as an educator, especially one of children of color, that we need to wait and see what it's going to look like when children come back and actually get them in front of us and first take care of their emotional needs and then address the educational needs. And we can do that through targeted programs like ZERN, which the district offers. We can also do that through targeted instructions by the teachers, which they will deliver probably in small group instruction during their what is it called? I'm trying to think of what we call it at the city, what you guys call it, during their targeted instruction or their instructional support time. So I'm confident that all of our teachers will be able to do this, and then we will continue with programs like ZERN and EPIC to help the children, especially those who have special needs, so we can address them, as well as doing this equitably and doing it without increasing our cost. So.
Thank you. I do want to say I concur with doing it equitably and just submit that I don't think we need more data. I think teachers know what we do need now, and I would prefer that there is an intervention and some planning in the current budget, and that's my comment. So thank you for your response.
Thank you for your feedback. Anyone else who would like to comment or ask questions? Using my teacher wait time here. Okay. Well, I thank you for being here and for all your support throughout the course of the year. And we hope that we will continue to have that same level of support as we move forward and look to reopen more fully. Thank you.